The following program is presented by the Far East Broadcasting Company because stories of people living out the gospel with their lives inspire all of us. FEBC, taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. Learn more at febc.org.
I feel I understand the human toil, sacrifice, suffering, devotion, and courage, bravery that it took. And it makes me value what we have even more.
Welcome to First Person for an interview with the late David McCullough as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of America. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Taken from our archive, this is part 2 of a conversation with Mr. McCullough about his book 1776, with a look at the struggles experienced by George Washington as he led the Continental Army. If you missed part 1 of this interview last week, it's available at firstpersoninterview.com. Now, part 2 of 1776. We're talking about a year unlike any other year in American history, but as I said earlier, we understand so little about it. We left off talking about George Washington and this young man that served him so well, Joseph Reed, who suddenly turned against Washington and wrote a letter to Washington's really archenemy, the man who would have liked to have had Washington's role in the as
and
general.
A man who had many supporters in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Washington was losing. Washington was losing in disastrous fashion, one battle after another, and he was. If the war had been covered by the media, as we know it, he would have been out of there.
He'd been gone,
and probably everyone would have been against the war because everything was going badly. And but he was a man who Washington was a man who learned from his mistakes. That's another of his strengths. And he was a man who was, there's no other way to say it, he was extremely loyal. Loyalty mattered to Washington. Mm-hmm. And here was Reed being disloyal. Washington only found out about it because Charles Lee, who received the letter from Reed, then wrote back to Reed saying that, yes, indecision is the worst thing you can have in a military commander. Nothing can be so detrimental to military success.
You can almost read between the lines of that letter.
Indecision, yes. Yeah. Well, the letter came and when Reed was away, and Washington had been trying to get Charles Lee, who was in command of another part of the army, to join him in New Jersey. This is when the war is at its worst. This is the darkest time. So in the midst of the darkest time, his most trusted aide betrays him. And he opens the letter and reads what Lee has said about indecision.
The letter intended for Reed, Washington read. Wow.
So Washington knows right away, sees right away what's up, that both of these men, upon whom he is depending, think he's incapable, think he's the wrong man for the job, and who knows what all else Reed and Lee are cooking up.
And Washington already feels insecure.
Oh, absolutely. He knows that he's failing. He knows that he's commanding a losing army and that many of these dreadful setbacks have been his fault.
He's aware of his limitations.
Oh, absolutely. And so what does he do? He writes a letter to Reed saying, here is the letter which I mistakenly opened because I thought it might be from Lee telling me that he was on his way with his army. I would never have opened it had I not. Doesn't say anything.
He doesn't. Oh.
Later on, he tells Reed, I would have been able to take this if you would, much better than I have or am, if you would come to me and said that to me. But he doesn't fire him. He doesn't ship him out to some meaningless post somewhere else, nor did he fire Nathaniel Greene when Greene made such a bad call on whether to try and hold Fort Washington. Mm-hmm. Both men, let me first of all by say, he's repaying Greene's loyalty to him with loyalty to Greene, mm-hmm. and he's repaying Reed's former loyalty mm-hmm. to him by remaining loyal to Reed. Mm-hmm. But he's also acknowledging that these are very good young men.
And they both move on to significant achievements.
And they're going to do better from now on. And both of them spend a lot of energy and time and thought on how they can redeem themselves in his eyes, his Washington's eyes. And both continue on and perform better than they ever have.
Well, their loyalty to the general, to Washington, must have increased tremendously when he forgave them. In essence,
Yes.
that's what he did. Is he forgave them.
Did, and he knew he liked to say, "We must take people as they are, not as we would wish they were." And if this is what they are, I will take them as, and because I know their strengths. We often say so and so, he's a very human being because he made this mistake or he has this flaw or that weakness, which is all true. That's one of the ways I try to explain to people that these weren't marble men. These weren't demigods we're talking about. These are human beings. But we can also understand their humanity when they do things that are extraordinary, because that too is part of us. And Washington wasn't a great intellectual. He wasn't a brilliant thinker like Adams or Jefferson, and he wasn't a spellbinding orator like Patrick Henry, and he wasn't a Napoleon. He wasn't a brilliant general.
Kind of hard to describe him altogether.
But he was a leader.
Yeah.
He was a leader. Men would follow him. He had great courage, both physical and moral courage. He had phenomenal health, and I think that's a very important point, because everybody's getting sick all the time. Yeah. One of the reasons that the Battle of Brooklyn turned out such a fiasco is Greene was sick. Yeah. And many people feel if Greene had been well and on the job, a lot of that wouldn't have happened, and I think that's true. And Washington, there's epidemic dysentery, smallpox, typhus, typhoid. Everybody's getting sick.
Rampant.
Losing more men from disease than from musket ball or cannon fire. And Washington's perfectly healthy and strong all the time. And he's got this terrific pressure on him. Terrific. I don't know when the man slept. And in fact, I think one of the reasons things were going so badly at the time of Fort Washington, I think he was suffering from insomnia. He wasn't himself. And he never gets sick. And then he will not give up. And he never forgets what the fight is about, what the glorious cause means. And this, too, is of the utmost importance.
This really wasn't even a war for independence when it started.
No, it was not. They were fighting for their rights as free-born Englishmen. And it wasn't until after that speech of the kings that we talked about earlier came to light, the people began to say, well, this is not a family squabble anymore. This is a war. And why don't we just go for independence? And what's so interesting to me is that three of the principal characters in this whole drama are Quakers. Nathaniel Greene, Thomas Mifflin, who was the hero of the successful retreat from one of the heroes from a successful retreat in Brooklyn, and Thomas Paine. And they put aside their pacifist feelings because they felt that some wars are necessary. And
that's a remarkable statement.
It is. And Paine writes, "The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth."
Wow. You have read many of the letters of George Washington.
I have.
He wrote many letters, even during this time frame, even on the road, so to speak.
He wrote
right?
nearly 1,000 letters in this course of this 1 year. Think of that.
What is your overall impression from reading that court? Was it to Martha? Who was it to?
No, unfortunately, Martha destroyed all the letters that she wrote to him and that the general wrote to her. And so we have nothing except for 3 letters, which she somehow put aside in the book somewhere and forgot where they were. And thank goodness, because one of them is a letter in which he's saying, I am not adequate for this job. But destiny seems to be in control. I'm in the hands of destiny. It's a very powerful, very eloquent letter. The man only had about the equivalent of a 5th grade education. Experience had been his great teacher in life, but he was very intelligent. And he knew that a leader has to not only act the part, but have the appearance of a leader. So while he's in command of that ragtag, motley rabble in arms.
Trying to keep them together. And
he's resplendent in a beautiful, perfectly tailored uniform. He's always the figure of the leader. Rides a big horse and sits a horse like a gentleman should.
But with some leaders, it stops there.
Yes, that's right. But there's a wonderful moment at the end of the year where it's all over. I mean, it's just Washington himself even says, "I think the game's pretty near up." And there's a fellow named William Tudor, who was madly in love with a young woman named Delia Jarvis back in Boston, and she was the daughter of Tories, loyalists, and he had been John Adams' law clerk, but he'd signed up and became Washington's adjutant general. And all through the struggle, Delia is writing to him, "Why don't you give this up? It's useless. You're not going to win, and come home. We can get married and be happily ever after." And he agrees. He doesn't agree that it's a lost cause, but he agrees that there's nothing more that he wants in the world than to go home and marry Julia and live happily ever after. And on Christmas Day, the night before the march to Trenton, the crossing of the Delaware, he writes back to her. He says, "I cannot leave this good man who has sacrificed everything in the cause of his country."
That's leadership.
That's leadership. I cannot leave him. I will not desert him.
Coming up, more of our conversation with David McCullough on this edition of First Person.
Hi, I'm Ed Cannon, the president of the Far East Broadcasting Company, and I'd like to invite you to join us on our podcast, Until All Have Heard, where Wayne Shepherd and I will take you on a virtual tour around Christian ministry in the most unreached places in the world to see what God is doing through the ministry of the Far East Broadcasting Company.
So listen to the new weekly podcast, Until All Have Heard, from FEBC. Listen at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms, or go to febc.org. Let's return now to David McCullough. Right at the beginning of your book, you have a quotation from George Washington: "Perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages." How appropriate, huh?
That was his motto. He lived by that, and his actions not only lived up to his words, they in many cases surpassed them. And I think he was, to a very large degree, a man of action more than words, and we should interpret him more in what he did, his actions. I think he was the greatest American of all time. He set the example for leadership and service, duty to the country. He understood the meanings of honor and virtue and character, and his selflessness. If, as I mentioned in the book, and as I've sometimes said in talks I've given, that his troops felt uplifted by the fact that he was so rich, people that can't understand how that could be. And it goes right back to what Billy Tudor said, that a man who's giving up so much, their feeling was, if a man who has all this wealth and all this position,
he came out of retirement,
is willing to put it all on the line, sacrifice, who are we to hold back?
That's a great example.
Yes.
We talked about Washington's letters, but the research that you do, just comment about how you go about doing what you do. The letters, the journals,
the letters, the journals, the diaries are the heart of the matter. That's where you find it.
From the common soldier all the way up through General George Washington.
Yes, and they've survived in surprising numbers. And, of course, to hold one of those in your own hand is to make a connection that I can't describe.
Yeah.
They are often very difficult to read because they were written under very adverse conditions. They're sometimes simple to the point of almost childlike, but they can also be eloquent as any of the eloquent writing of the 18th century.
And I'm sure you have to wade through a lot to find the gold there, right?
Yes, but not always. Nathaniel Greene's letters, for example, are pure gold from start to finish, virtually every one he ever wrote. Again, a man who only had about a equivalent of a fifth grade education, but who never stopped.
Yeah.
Who never lost the love of learning. That's the real point.
Yeah.
And Joseph Reed's letters to his wife are superb. But my own heart goes out to people like Joseph Hodgkins, the Ipswich, Massachusetts shoemaker, and Jabez Fitch, who was a Connecticut farmer.
Isn't he the one that said he survived through the goodness of God? I survived this battle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he keeps a diary under the most incredible conditions. The days when they're in the rain or the snow and they're not getting anything to eat and they've been on the march all day long and they're exhausted. And there's no nice electric light or warm tent to sit and write your letter. And somehow or other, he's keeping those diary entries going, even when he's taken prisoner by the British and put on one of those vile prison ships. And that, we mustn't picture nice leather-bound journals from Mark Cross or something.
So whatever they could find to write on, huh?
Yes, the little scraps of paper, like a little child's school tablet. And he must have been stuffing them into his shoes or something, because the British didn't allow you to do that because they didn't want word to get out of how wretched conditions were for the prisoners.
Okay, I see. Well, we have a little bit of time left. There's one person who figures prominently in this story we haven't talked much about, and that's Henry Knox. Now, you included him in that those young men that George Washington really leaned on. Henry Knox was only 25 years old when he came into service. He was a bookseller.
Yeah.
He was a librarian, so to speak, right? And yet he had one of the most incredible military achievements of all time.
He had a great career. He became Secretary of War in Washington's cabinet after Washington became president.
Of course, we all know Fort Knox today.
Yes, exactly.
But tell us about moving. This is early in the war, all the way back to Boston.
He came to Washington with an idea. Now, first of all, he's way down the pecking order, and somehow or other, Washington saw him and talked to him and liked him. And when you're running an amateur army and everybody's ideas are of interest, and you want all the ideas you can get, and you don't care. There's no bureaucracy yet. And he came to Washington with an idea to go to the old Fort Ticonderoga, way up in upstate New York, and bring back the guns that had been captured when Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys took the fort the year before. But the cannon were all still there.
But in winter.
In winter. And he's going to go up there and he's going to pull these cannon, 58 of them, all the way down the Hudson River and over the Berkshire Mountains to Boston. That's nearly 300 miles in the dead of winter through wilderness. There's no Massachusetts Turnpike or anything. And it's a wonderful example, Wayne, of how the solution to the problem can often be the problem. The problem is, as you said, it's winter. But Knox saw that because it was winter, therefore they could do this because they could haul it on giant sleds or sledges over the snow. And the only real setback they faced, unexpectedly, was when there was a sudden thaw. And there was no snow. And again, as if by the finger of God, as Washington would say, there was a blizzard. And as a consequence, they hauled those guns all the way across from Ticonderoga to Boston. They put them up on Dorchester Heights in one night. And when the British general, William Howe, woke up the next morning, he's under siege.
His surprise.
Under siege in Boston, and he looked up and saw those cannon up there on the top of Dorchester Heights. He said, "Those fellows have done in one night what my army couldn't do in 3 months." So that if they didn't know how to drill, if they didn't have a love of the military, if they had no uniforms, if they had no proper shoes or muskets, if they had no gunpowder, which they didn't, or money, they knew how to get jobs done. They knew how to do hard work.
Resourceful people, huh?
And they knew how to yoke an oxen. And there were over 800 oxen involved in this business of getting the guns up there at night. It was one of the remarkable turning points of the war, but it also gave them false confidence. They thought, boy, we're something. We've shamed these British. We've made them sail out of the city of Boston. And of course, what happened was the British come back with a vengeance. They come back with an armada of 400 ships, the biggest fleet ever sent forth to defeat a distant foe at that time or any time before.
History, right?
Nobody ever seen anything like it. Not even the British had ever seen anything like it. 400 ships sail up into New York Harbor, all under sail, It was some spectacle. They landed 32,000 troops, the best troops in the world. Now, 32,000 troops was more people than the entire population of Philadelphia, which was the largest city in any of the colonies.
Wow. And many of them were Hessian?
Many of them were Hessian. Some 7,000 of them were Hessian.
Mercenaries.
And that really raised our anger almost as if nothing else had. How could our king, the man we were devoted to, go out and hire these paid killers to come and defeat us, his loyal, until recently loyal subject? That really rankled. And they were tough troops, and we were frightened. We were scared of them.
Yeah.
And it took us a while to get over that.
I know that you're hearing from people who say, I wish you'd tell the story of the whole war, and you don't. You stop with the year 1776. Yes. Where does the year end? Where does the book end?
The book ends with the stunning surprise victory at Trenton, and then follows up just almost immediately in the first week of January with the, again, another success at Princeton.
Now, there was
I wanted to tell the story of the most important year in the most important conflict in our history.
There was lots of war that took place after the victory there at Trenton, but that really was, suddenly there was hope, wasn't there?
Yes, it lifted morale. It lifted morale in an astonishing fashion everywhere, not just in the Army, but all over the country.
For you personally, to pour so much into the research and understanding, what does it do to your own soul for these things, to understand these things?
Well, I feel I know them better. I feel I understand the human toil, sacrifice, suffering, and the devotion and courage, bravery that it took. And it makes me value what we have even more and want to do my part in my way to convey that to other people. It makes me proud to be an American. It makes me want very much to see that our children are educated in a more effective way so that they understand history. We, alas, are not doing a very good job of that. And it makes me want to know more. I think that's Mary Lee Settle, who's a wonderful historical novelist and a very wise person, once said, "I write to find out." And I think that comes pretty close to a perfect description. I want to find out.
The late David McCullough reflected on what he learned through his thorough research of the year 1776, when America was fighting for its independence. This completes our two-part interview recorded in 2005. If you missed part one, please visit firstpersoninterview.com, where it can be heard in the archive of programs, and feel free to share the link. At the same website, we'll place a link to David McCullough's book, 1776, and also a link to a previous first-person interview he did with me regarding his John Adams book. Look for those links at firstpersoninterview.com. Thanks to the Far East Broadcasting Company for making First Person possible. FEBC's podcast, Until All Have Heard, is available on several podcast platforms and at febc.org. Learn more about this international ministry and how to pray for it at febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thank you for listening to First Person.